Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Cine-Files Live here on the Cine-Files YouTube channel. I am one half of the Cine-Files. I am the outlaw John Rocha, joined as always by my co-host and, shall we say, a member of the batting order, the top three of the batting order here, Steve Morris. How are you, Steve?
I appreciate you put me in the top three. I definitely wouldn't be the number one spot. I'm no good at stealing bases. I'm not fast. Occasionally, I've been able to ding one out of the park, but those days were a long time ago. But I like being in the top three. What's your position in the batting order?
Well, I would probably be. Well, I would probably. I maybe second or third. I would imagine in the batting order. I don't want the pressure of being the first. I just want to get on base, and I'll handle it once I get on base. And I don't want the pressure of the sweep up, right? The sweeper, they're the fourth position here, trying to knock everybody home. So I'm kind of in that place. But I'll be honest with you, most of the time I was near the bottom of the batting order because I wasn't the greatest. I wasn't the greatest hitter, shall we say? But I was a good outfielder, just wasn't a good hitter. But we're talking all around what we're talking about today, and that is baseball movies, the power of baseball movies here on this live episode of the Cine-Files. We do these every month. It's a great way to kind of take a little bit of a break from the regular show. And certainly, Steve, we've been just climbing out of the season of Scorsese now. We've already recorded parts of Captain America Winter Soldier that is upcoming, and we've certainly recorded a bunch of shorts that are coming out as well. Hope you all have been enjoying that. But Steve, anything we should tell the fans before we jump in that give them an update on what's going on with the Cine-Files and where we're headed and what's new and what's happening and what's going on in the world of the Cine-Files?
Well, I think you hit the big one, which is what's coming up is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And we have a special guest. We couldn't talk about Captain America without our resident Captain America expert and geek buddy, Shannon McClung, who joined us for part one. And that is the movie is so good. And it is. And honestly, I loved our season of Scorsese. I love talking about heavy boxing stories and crime and then getting into religion. But to be able to just jump into a fantastic MCU thriller has just been a joy. So that's been great.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It's been fun to take a little bit of a break from that. And honestly, we're going to go on a little bit of a run. Steve and I have already talked about this, focusing on movies that are much more crowd pleasers, much more fun, much more relaxed. We might veer into some deeper stuff over the next few months, but we're going to try to kind of walk out of the season of Scorsese, take a little bit of a break, stretch out, smile again, have some ice cream in the sun, and enjoy some of these other movies. And Steve and I are going to map out the next few months for sure. And of course, the advisory board will help us with that. And speaking of the advisory board, they're one of the big reasons why we're doing baseball movies today. It was one of the suggestions from the fine folks over there at that advisory board. And speaking of the advisory board, it is part of being a member of the Patreon, and patreon.com/the Cine-Files is where you can go to see the multiple tiers, multiple benefits. And our advisory board people, we meet once every month and we talk about where the show is going, what we can do to improve the show. They suggest sometimes movies or topics just like this for live shows or shorts, things of that nature. And it's a great way to touch base with the people in our fandom, in our who listen to us in our listenership or in our viewership, and get a taste for what's going on. Read the room, take the temperature of the room, so to speak, and see how we're doing. So that's a big benefit for those of you who are big fans of the Cine-Files. If you join at a certain level, you can be a part of that every month with us. Is that correct, Steve? Am I right on that, Steve?
I believe that you said everything correctly. As a co-chair of the advisory board with me, I think you know as much about it as anybody. And the one thing I would add is that there is time if you go to patreon.com/the Cine-Files right now. You can in time for our advisory board meeting that's coming up on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific time. So now's the time to get in. And I know some of the things we're going to be talking about is the future of the podcast. We're going to probably talk about Captain America, the Winter Soldier a little bit, figure out what our next live show is. We don't know what our next watch along is. We've got shorts to figure out. We got a lot of planning to do. And all of that is going to happen at Tuesday, 4 p.m. at our advisory board meeting. So sign up right now and you can join us.
There you go. All right. So we're getting into baseball movies and we're going to talk about the power of baseball movies and go through this. And just a reminder, the Streamlabs and the SuperChats are open. So if you want to send support, send in your love. The Streamlabs address is right above Steve and I's head there in the middle. It's also pinned in the chats in the description of the video. And Super Chats, you all know how to send those in. Carlton, Rudder, and J&B have already sent in a couple, so we'll be reading those in a little bit, but we want to get the show going before we jump into those. So Let's talk about baseball. Steve, this is an American pastime. Ken Burns, I think, did a wonderful, the seminal documentary on baseball if you really want to learn and understand the beginnings of baseball. And certainly a game that has been tied to Americana, it's called our national pastime. It is so intrinsic in the American culture. So I have to ask you, what is your feeling, experience, and overall connection to baseball?
It's so funny because, as you know, my house is literally walking distance. It's a good walk, but it's walking distance to Dodger Stadium.
Oh,
And
yes.
so I could be going to baseball games all the time, and yet I don't.
Right.
And you would take that to mean that, oh, this guy doesn't really care about baseball. He's got no association with baseball. And the exact opposite is really true.
Hmm.
Baseball is so deep in my family's DNA. And in particular, it's, and this is part of why baseball movies are so profound,
Yeah.
is it connects to my dad, and how many people have, there's a reason I was sobbing at the end of our Field of Dreams podcast, because it all connects to my dad. My dad was a huge, huge San Francisco Giants fan.
Mm.
He was a San Francisco Seals fan before the Giants came. And when the Giants came to the West Coast, that was a seminal moment in my dad's life, I think. And we all went to opening day at Candlestick Park to see the Giants. For all the years of my childhood, I was taken out of school. They went, Steve doesn't need to be in kindergarten today. It's opening day at the Giants. So and at all the time, if there was a baseball game being played, my dad had it on the radio. Like, it was always, so I just always heard, particularly from the time I was a super little kid until the time I was in high school.
Yeah.
The baseball game was always, and you never said to my dad, hey, Dad, can we listen to some music? Hey, Dad, can we just, no, the Giants are on. And so those early teams, I knew all the lineups. And then when I started playing Little League, it was always, hey, Dad, can we have a catch? Can we have a catch? It's like such a huge part of growing up. And so, and I'll tell one story, and I'll tell it really quick, just in terms of my relationship to baseball.
Sure.
Is my father-in-law was a huge Dodger fan, a Brooklyn Dodger fan.
Ooh,
and so obviously the Dodgers and the Giants, that's trouble. And when I was probably first married, it was a Dodger Giant game at Candlestick Park, and I was going with Karen's family.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were going to sit where the Dodgers are. And I went, you know what? I'm 30 years old. I haven't followed baseball in a long time. I don't even know the names of the players on the Giants,
right?
Because I'm not listening to the radio all the time. And I said to my father-in-law, you know what? I don't really care about this baseball thing. I'm just going to be a Dodger fan today. I'm going to walk in. I'm going to root for the Dodgers. And we get to Candlestick. We go up the escalator. We're walking through the tunnel. And the experience of walking through a tunnel, coming into a baseball stadium, and the Candlestick opens up in front of me, and I went, nope, I'm a fucking Giants fan, and I'm rooting for the Giants.
Yeah,
that's how much it means to me.
Candlestick is a place of many memories and legends. Certainly that also for the 49ers, that massive catch from Dwight Clark that sent the 49ers in that dynasty there in the 80s into the 90s with Montana and Steve Young. And certainly with baseball, I remember that being a big deal there in the 80s and 90s as well in Candlestick Park. And if I remember correctly, wasn't that where the earthquake happened? Was that at Candlestick Park for that World Series?
It was, and my parents were there. They were at Candlestick for that. There was no way my parents, both of them, I shouldn't cut my mom out, who might be watching this right now, because baseball she might very well be, and she loved the Giants as much as my dad, and there was no way they were going to miss the Giants playing the A's at Candlestick in the World Series. They were absolutely there when that earthquake hit.
That's incredible. Wow. And listen, and we're starting out with talking about our baseball memories, and we're getting into baseball movies. We just wanted to lay the foundation first of that, so you understand where we're coming from, maybe find some universality or commonality, and everyone's got their own story on how they came to baseball. Because I certainly came from a completely different direction from Steve. It's fascinating. You talk about the San Francisco Giants. I mean, they used to be the New York Giants. The Brooklyn Dodgers became the LA Dodgers. So that is an old rivalry that has been going on both coasts. So there's a lot of history there between those two teams, and for you to be part of that for such a long time generationally, I think is incredible. Growing up as the son of immigrants, we weren't a baseball family initially. My dad, of course, big into soccer. That's what we did. Dad, you want to have a catch? Is my dad and I kicking the soccer ball to each other in the backyard. That's what that kind of symbolized for me, the Field of Dreams moment. And though I never really had a catch with my dad, I kicked the soccer ball with my dad all the time. But the way I came to baseball is one of the things that when you're born in this country and your parents are immigrants, sometimes you learn the language quicker than they do. You understand certain things quicker than they do. And I remember that sports was something that my father and I could connect to even when I was single digits years old. And I remember one of the first games I ever saw was the Reggie Jackson 1977 World Series with the Yankees, and when Reggie pointed, or legendarily pointed, right? And so Reggie Jackson was my introduction into baseball. I had never watched a baseball game until I watched that World Series game, because I grew up in DC where there was no baseball, because Washington had folded their team and became, I think, the Texas Rangers, the Washington Senators becoming the Texas Rangers before they came back just a couple of decades ago and became the Senators again there in Washington. And I really wasn't a Baltimore Orioles person because I just didn't identify with Baltimore at that time when I was growing up. So for me, it was the Yankees, and I became a Yankees fan from that moment on. The pinstripes, that NY, there's such a regalness and a strength and a nobility to that. And I know everyone, the evil empire and all of that. But to me, to see the game played in that way with these incredible superstars and the drama and all of that, that's what hooked me into baseball. And then as I got older, I became a Phillies fan because I was born in Philadelphia. So I was a big fan of Steve Carlton and Mike Schmidt and Tim McGraw's dad, who was on the team as well. The singer Tim McGraw, his dad was legendarily on that team. And so I became a Phillies fan. And then eventually, enjoying Baltimore, I would go see the games, go see Jim Palmer, go see Earl Weaver, who's the manager of the Orioles at the time, Memorial Stadium. That's where they played. But I was always a Yankees fan, and my best friend growing up, Maurice, he was a Red Sox fan. And so when we got to a certain age, that's what became the predominant thing, is that we would be following and giving each other shit and watching the games and watching the World Series and talking about that. And all of that was so important to me growing up. But I remember before I went back to college, when I was transitioning into the reserves, Maurice and I went on an East Coast trip trying to go to every ballpark we could before he took his new job and I went back to college. And so I remember that being one of these seminal experiences, going to the ballparks, going to Bronx Stadium, going to Fenway Park, going to Shea Stadium, going to Vets, the old Vets for the Phillies, and all of that stuff. And then Camden Yards, of course, which is still relatively new at the time. It was such a great experience. So baseball has been a thing that I've always loved and revered. I became a closet Dodgers fan in the 80s because of that Kirk Gibson home run against the A's. And Fernando, a Latino pitcher like Fernando Valenzuela, that was huge for me growing up. And so I became a Dodgers fan through that kind of from the East Coast. And then when I moved to the West Coast in LA, I became a big Dodgers fan with the young guys like Russell Martin and Kemp coming up. Martin Kemp, I think, is coming up, and all of that stuff. Manny came over, which was incredible. Garcia Parra. So, I remember having all of these experiences. But Steve, I think for both of us, what was the companion were baseball movies, right? And we were very lucky to grow up in the two most popular decades for legendary baseball movies, the 80s and the 90s. In no other decade did you find the success for baseball movies in the frequency that you did than the 80s and the 90s. So along with the explosion of Major League Baseball in the 80s and 90s was also the explosion of these incredible baseball movies. Do you remember the first baseball movie you went to or experienced, or were consciously aware of that this was something different than you'd seen before in a movie theater?
I certainly couldn't tell you the first baseball movie, but I can definitely tell you the seminal baseball movie of my childhood.
Okay.
And that is going to see the Bad News Bears. Seeing the Bad News Bears, which I will still put probably in my top 5 baseball movies.
Hey, man, I don't think a lot of people would fault you for that. It's a good movie.
I think that movie is so great. And I went to see it. I think it's 76 or 77. So I'm 9-10 years old. I'm exactly the age of those kids. Yeah. I'm a kid that was, let's be real clear, I wasn't a terrible athlete, but I was not a jock either. Like when we were joking about where I was in the batting average, there was a couple of years where I bat cleanup until they invented the curveball. And the curveball was invented right around when the Bad News Bears came out, in my mind, because right around 9 or 10 years old was when those 9 or 10-year-olds started to figure out they could do this thing. And I could never hit a curveball. And so I went down to the bottom, and I definitely was that kid in the outfield sometimes going, please don't hit it to me. Please don't hit it to me. Please don't hit it to me. I definitely, 9, 10 years old, right around this time is when I kind of became really awkward and shy and didn't have a lot of friends. And so the Bad News Bears, which is filthy, there's an alcoholic who's like the main adult, there's all sorts of swearing, there's racial epithets, and this is a movie, it is, because it came out, it's right around the same time as Rocky, and Rocky and the Bad News Bears to me are perfect companion sports movies because they both lose at the end and they're both triumphs for those teams. So that one 100%.
Two fantastic 1970s endings where the hero doesn't win but does win by not winning, which is incredible to watch when you watch those movies. I agree 100%. Yeah, I remember watching the Bad News Bears as a kid, but it was one of those movies that was like lumped in with the rest of the movies of young adult movies like Bugsy Malone and other things that I've watched around that time. It wasn't until I watched The Natural. That was the movie that put the zap in me as a young teen, seeing that movie on VHS for the first time, renting it because I'd been such a fan of Robert Redford and whatever, and seeing it. And I just remember going crazy for the movie. I remember buying it because it was like on sale for some reason, and I bought it used, and I wore the tape out of that thing. I remember recording it off NBC one night when they showed it on TV with commercials with my new VCR, or my parents' new VCR. I recorded. So The Natural is the seminal baseball movie for me that changed my mind about the power of baseball movies. Oh, what baseball movies could become. I remember when we did the show, like I didn't do the numbers of like, wait, how could he come back? And wait, Robert Redford is how old? And how is it? Who is he? Like none of that mattered to me. I just bought into the Americana of the game. And that film really brings the power of what baseball used to mean and signify for a lot of people for a number of generations in our lives, which was this kind of magical place where crazy things happen, where a team can somehow overcome these odds. And here's the gift of baseball: it is it is team on team at the same time as it is an individualistic situation, batter versus pitcher, and then the whole team is also involved in trying to win the game. So it's a fascinating film, it's a fascinating sport rather, that lends itself to film, lends itself to being filmed. Not to mention the ballpark, Steve, right? The majesty of the ballparks. There's just something about baseball parks that you put above football fields, put above a soccer fields, put above, even though I love Anfield. There's just something about baseball fields that when you walk into them, there's a magic. Billy Crystal spoke about how you just spoke about walking the Candlestick. When he walked into Yankee Stadium for the first time when he was a kid, he just remembers that the magic was like, it was like Michael Corleone when he sees Apollonia, the lightning bolt just hit him. And so The Natural was the one that kind of showed me why people love this sport the way they do. Barry Levinson doing a wonderful job directing that movie.
Well, if we're gonna say like, if the Bad News Bears is in my top 5 or even top 3, The Natural is probably number 1.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And it's definitely one that you and I have talked about. It's a fairly early movie in the Cine-Files. I think both of us would love to redo it in a 100%. More substantial way. And I think it brings together exactly why I've always say that baseball and to some degree boxing are the two best sports for films. And you brought up many of the points, which is one is it's that connection to Americana that is so powerful. It has this whole tradition and history about it that you feel in a baseball movie. The second thing is what we both talked about, which is our dads, the father and son relationship is always going to be critical. And maybe it's not going to be as much in the future because the world has changed so much, but for me, that's always going to have an emotional wallop. And then the other thing about it, and all of this is so perfectly in The Natural, is, as you said, is that it's a team sport, but it comes down to mano a mano, and there is no sport. And yes, we know that if someone knocks somebody out, that ends the boxing match. We get that. But there's no sport that it can be clearer about exactly what the stakes are and that they're all happening in this one moment. If it's 3-2, it's the bottom of the ninth. You know what the score is. You know exactly what happens, and they can foul off a pitch, and they can foul off another pitch, and we know everything is coming to this moment. And this is what movies do so well, and particularly with editing. The Natural, again, is the perfect example, is slowing down time to focus on one moment, so that moment becomes the most dramatic moment you possibly can have. And The Natural does it better than any other movie, because when he hits that ball into the lights, it is the ultimate delivery on all the potential that a baseball movie has, you know.
And as I said, it's the combination of the team and the individual thing, which you're highlighting so well, Steve. Because in basketball, you can have a one-on-one with amidst a play with 5-on-5, but you can choose to do that, right? Basketball, if you wanted to, you could just keep passing and passing until somebody shoots. In baseball, there is no getting out of the pitcher versus the batter. There is no getting out of it. And yes, the other players can move to intimidate the batter, rather, or move back or move forward to intimidate the batter and what have you. The batter himself could bunt in order to get the other team and get himself on. Yes, but the game itself is constructed to be individualistic and a team effort at the same time. And I think in that way it represents America, because we always want to revere the hero that stands out above the rest, but also reward people coming together to overcome obstacles, to overcome the odds, to somehow have a magical moment and succeed. And so I think it tickles all of us. And, you know, baseball movies nowadays, they're not as prevalent. They're not as well made. They're not as revered. We don't see them with the frequency that we did before. And I mean that the theatrical fictional baseball movies, or based on true story fictional baseball movies, we don't see those anymore like we did in the 80s and the 90s. They occasionally pop up now in the last 20 years. And I think that's because baseball has been supplanted now by the NBA, by the NFL. There are other sports. That being said, though, and soccer certainly is making its inroads here, or football is making its inroads here in the States. That being said, though, those sports have not lent themselves over the last couple of decades to the level of quality and emotional effect that the great baseball movies made for us in the 80s and 90s. And for anybody who goes back to watch them now, to understand and explore the greatness of these baseball movies, for sure.
Well, and if I could add one more just sort of technical thing about it, because because I think it's important in the way that we film sports, which is what baseball does that I don't know that maybe cricket does too, I guess, but not a lot of sports do this, which is that it stops every time and resets.
Yes,
so at the end of each play, we're back to the play. The pitcher has the ball, and now we're going to do exactly the same thing again.
Yeah.
And that focuses all of your attention in on, here comes the moment. The moment is on its way. Yeah. Now we're here now, and now is the moment. Whereas in basketball and soccer and football and boxing and all of these things, you're in the midst of, football does reset, but it's so complex. It doesn't have that simplicity. Whereas in basketball, and I think with both of them, part of the fun is you don't know what's going to happen. It's the unexpected. And that's why I think it's really hard for, like, my favorite thing in football, I've said many times, is the incredible run. Is that watching that great player break tackles, spin, evade, all that stuff. That's great. It's really, really hard to choreograph something better than watching the greatest football player of all time have a run. Yeah. It's really hard to choreograph something better than watching Michael Jordan drive to the basket.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to choreograph. Whereas in baseball, because we stop and start, it's really hard for real baseball sometimes to match like what you could do filmically. And I'm not saying there aren't great baseball moments that are real. Of course there are, and they're amazing. Sure. But like, it's a very different animal, you know, than what you get in these other sports.
We should talk about the history of baseball a little bit. The first listed baseball movie is a documentary from 1898 called The Ball Game, and it's a short film depicting an 1898 baseball game between the Reading Phillies and the Newark Bears. The first official feature film is actually a film that's been lost to the ages. It was a 5-reeler, which was the original version of Casey at the Bat. There was a one that came a little bit later, I think in the 20s, but that was the first official feature film. And when you go back, you can see that there were baseball movies through the 1900s, into the 20s, and into the 30s. But for me, when you're looking at the history of baseball films, everything changes with 1942's The Pride of the Yankees, which featured Gary Cooper as the legendary Yankee Lou Gehrig, who gets Lou Gehrig, what would later be called Lou Gehrig's disease, and has to retire. That iconic speech that he delivers there near the end of the movie when he has to retire from baseball. And people loved Lou Gehrig. So this was a film that was very close in terms of time to when Lou Gehrig actually stepped down as a player for the New York Yankees. And there was so much drama involved. The guy was so beloved. So this film is the one where I think people start to understand the power of baseball movies. And we start to see some baseball movies that kind of copy that as it goes forward here with Jimmy Stewart, who plays a pitcher who returns to the mound after having his legs amputated. In the Stratton story, Ronald Reagan played President Grover Cleveland, the future President Grover Cleveland. Alexander there, who battled epilepsy and alcoholism there in the winning team. We saw 2 films with Jackie Robinson playing himself and Babe Ruth playing themselves in their own stories, or in themselves, like in the Pride of the Yankees, Babe Ruth plays himself as Babe Ruth. William Bendix plays him in the Babe Ruth story. So we see these attempts to try to capture the magic of the Pride of the Yankees. We even have maybe our first ever mental health sports movie with Fear Strikes Out, that Anthony Perkins plays this pitcher, I think Jimmy Pearsall, who is affected by and has essentially a mental health breakdown on the pitcher's mound, and how that happens to him and how he deals with it, which I think was based on an actual baseball player. So there are moments certainly in the 40s, 50s, and 60s where you see some stuff here. The 70s, you get Bang the Drum Slowly, you get the Bad News Bears, as you said, Steve, but it's really the 80s and the Bingo Long and his traveling Bingo Long and the Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings with Billy D. Williams and Richard Pryor, James Earl Jones, and others. And then it's really the 80s where things start to explode. So what's your thoughts on the history of baseball movies before we get to the 80s and 90s? Beyond the Bad News Bears, which you already spoke about, what's your thoughts when you look back? Were there any of these old classic baseball movies that you went back to watch or have watched in your life?
You know what's just occurred to me is, as you know, my dad died of Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yes.
And, and it just occurred to me that I have not watched that movie since my dad's death.
Oh, wow.
And I've seen, obviously I've heard the speech because it's one that gets played and, one of the great moments in film history, but I haven't watched the whole movie. I love those old movies. I really do. Even, it's like, is Babe Ruth a great actor? No, he's not.
Neither is Jackie.
Neither is Jackie Robinson, but I still like him. There's also a movie, it's not really a baseball movie, although there's baseball in it, which is horribly inaccurate in a million ways, but I watched over and over again as a kid, which is Jim Thorpe All-American with Burt Lancaster. And I ate all of those things up, and I think many of those it would be great to revisit, like particularly a Jim Thorpe movie is really a story that should be told today. I watched Bingo Long's Traveling All-Stars a ton because it was on TV, and that is an area that it is a crime that we don't have 20 baseball movies about the Negro Leagues, because there's so many stories that should have been told that weren't. I have never seen Fear Strikes Out. I've never seen the other one that you mentioned, the De Niro one with Bang
the Drum Slowly.
Bang the Drum Slowly. I've never seen either of those films, and I really feel like I should. But so there's a lot of films that I like. But I agree with you. When we get into the 80s, man, we get some great baseball movies. Yeah,
and I don't want to jump into just yet before I also mentioned that there were musicals for baseball. Take Me Out to the Ball Game with Take Me Out to the Ball Game with Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra. I think it's Vera Ellen. And then you have, Betty Garrett. And then you have Damn Yankees, which was, of course, a musical that was transferred, I think, from the stage there. So you had them. So you had comedies, you had drama, you had musicals, occasional documentaries on them from way back then. And then, like I said, it's really, and then into the 70s with Bang the Drum Slowly, which I would encourage you. I mean, that's a Robert De Niro film with Michael Moriarty and Vincent Gardenia as the manager of the Yankees during that time. And there were 3 Bad News Bears in the 70s, Steve. So did you see all of them? Breaking Training and Going to Japan?
Of course I saw all of them. And even as a kid, I knew that they weren't really good. But of course I saw all of them.
All right, so as we get into the 80s, and actually, let's take a quick break because we're at half an hour. And so in case we want to put in, our ads and stuff on the podcast. So let's take a quick break. And when we come back on the other side, we will jump into the 80s and 90s and talk about the great baseball movies from those 2 decades and their impact on us as fans of baseball and lovers of baseball movies right after this. All right, Steve, let's get into it. The 1980s. I think The Natural is where you start to have these baseball movies in the 80s and start to see and glimpse, as I said earlier, what could be done. You get comedies like Brewster's Millions. You get romantic movies like The Slugger's Wife. You get Amazing Grace and Chuck, which I think is a fantastic one with Gregory Peck as a president of the United States. But then it becomes the Kevin Costner situation, right? Bull Durham there, and then you have Field of Dreams in 89. In sandwich in between those, you have 8 Men Out, one of my favorite films that hardly anybody talks about anymore, Stealing Home with Mark Harmon and Jodie Foster, a young Jodie Foster. And then, of course, The Naked Gun, which has a big old baseball scene with Reggie Jackson putting on his old Angels uniform. And then Major League is really the last gasp of the baseball movie in the 80s, and we'll get into the 90s. So what are your thoughts when you look at these baseball movies in the 80s? Why was the 80s the right time for these movies to kind of capture the pop culture zeitgeist and still live on in a lot of our memories as some of the great baseball movies and greatest movies ever made?
You know, I hadn't thought about this question until you just asked it, but you know what I'll say? I think this is the baby boomers, you know, because it's the era that you know, these people that were born in the 50s and early 60s came up in the 60s, were gaining power in the 70s, and finally in the late 80s, suddenly they're the people that are running Hollywood. And what are they thinking about? They're thinking about their dads. They're thinking about, you know, the tradition, how they got there. Plus, it's the, you know, the end of the Reagan era where we're kind of getting back to being patriotic, getting back to thinking about America. And I think and the other thing, by the way, I think that's so interesting about this list of movies that you listed is we think of sports movies as a genre, but sports movies isn't really a genre. You know, sports movies is a setting, because Bull Durham and Field of Dreams and Major League and Stealing Home, and The Natural, these are very different movies in terms of their tone, you know, or 8 Men Out. Yes, they're all sports movies, but, you know, Bull Durham is a comedy. Major League is an entirely different kind of comedy, you know, whereas Field of Dreams is a nostalgic pastoral about, is it funny? Yeah, it is. But it is a heartfelt, it's a totally different kind of movie. And so what I love about these movies that you listed in this era, and even multiple with Kevin Costner, is that they can explore totally different things through the venue of baseball. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I think this is where baseball started to become a sport that you could bring your family to, right? And so you started to see that the transition of the people going to the ballpark in the 1980s, and of course you could bring your son, of course, back in the 60s, 70s, 50s, whatever, you passed it on. But I'm talking about the entire family. And I think in the 80s, the Major League Baseball wanted to get the wives and the moms and the sisters and the daughters and the aunts and the whole entire family. They wanted them all in there because they saw, hey, we could make more money by making it a family experience. And so when they made that change, more people had their eyes open to her growing up, because as a daughter and a son, when you're a young kid, you can't be telling your parents you don't want to go to the ball game. Like, you go and you experience it. And as you said, it's a way for the kids to connect with the dad usually, but sometimes the mom. Plenty of female sports fans are hardcore about their baseball teams in the 80s and into the 90s and what have you. So you saw, and I think that's what kind of changed people's points of views. And I think you made an excellent point, which I never thought about, which is the baby boomer side of things. Not only your dad, but also the idea that, you know, you could be heroic, or that the time had passed you by. And so how do you come to terms with that? Or the idea of, like, you guys are a bunch of, how can I say that, miscreants, or didn't quite get there, but you all coming together as a bunch of knuckleheads can somehow overcome this owner or this rich person who is trying to screw over baseball, like in Major League. So you saw these different connections for the baby boomer. And then, of course, the baby boomer that wants to be a romantic. That's what Field of Dreams is all about. Not only exploring the father-son relationship, but also exploring why there's such a romance for baseball, why the generations of Americans have loved baseball so much. So there's a hidden regalness to it that mirrors The Natural, in my opinion, in certain moments of that film. And so you see that all in these different ways. And then you have these comedies of like Naked Gun and others throughout this that I think work really well. So it starts to become a conduit for telling these other stories, but it's a conduit that feels universal to a lot of people in the 80s, which is why we saw, which is why we saw the baseball movie really start to explode in the 80s. And
I absolutely I don't know what magic it was that had all these movies come together at this moment,
yeah,
but it really is special. And I'm just going to make a quick digression,
sure.
just because this is just something I've been thinking about lately, and it relates to baseball, which is,
Mm.
and I know this won't make sense how I'm going to connect this, but we're in the middle of the week of Passover at the moment, and as
Okay.
everyone watching this probably knows that I'm an atheist, but I love traditions, and Passover was always my favorite holiday. And now that we live separately, we do it really differently, which is now today, actually, which is a weird day to do it. But when it's worked out, we're going to have a Zoom call, and I've got Karen is coming over and Jackson is here, and we're going to do a kind of little Passover with some of my cousins and my mom and my sister and all this stuff. And I was going like, oh, when I was a kid, this was a big tradition where the whole family came to my house or my grandparents' house, and we all worked all day and we were all there together. And these traditions are going away in the world that we have today. And it's like, and my son can't experience over this Zoom call that we're throwing together what I experienced as a kid. And the reason I relate to this is that that's what baseball is.
Yeah.
I'm not a baseball fan today, but I'm a fan of traditions. I love the tradition, and baseball was part of my family in a way it's not part of my son's family. And we're in this world where, with screens and social media and stuff like that, that all of these traditions that held America together in this weird way, they're ceasing to exist. And that's sad, for me. And that's kind of what I've been thinking about, as I've been thinking about, my son's not going to have deep feelings about baseball movies the way I have deep feelings about baseball movies, because he doesn't have that experience,
Yeah, it's fascinating too, because the irony is that the ratings aren't as strong for baseball anymore in the games and the World Series and the playoffs, but the attendance has never been higher over the last 10 years. The attendance has gone up every year exponentially at the ballpark. So I don't know if it's because families want to still hold on to that and pass that on to their kids,
maybe,
or if it's a place to go for a lot of people, like on a Sunday, to take your kids and it's 3 or 4 hours and you're good to go or whatever. So you're seeing that people still hunger for that communal connection through sports. And so I think I find it's always, but not necessarily at the home, right? And so, like you said, like a lot of your experience with your dad is you sitting at the home, listening to him listen to the radio, or be with him while he listens to the radio.
Yeah,
it's different than being at the ballpark, And so I think that's what's becoming the lure for a lot of people as we look at baseball and how it's progressing nowadays. Anything more you want to say about these 1980s baseball movies, and make sure we hit before we move on here, man?
I mean, there's so many little things, like so many scenes in Bull Durham where you have, the on the mound, the little argument, Kevin Costner's speech, all of the stuff about going to the show and the traditions and luck and all. And I've heard both on Major League and on Bull Durham that, no, this is what it's like, like just that stuff. So great. And then, I can't say how much Field of Dreams is going to make me cry, like Field of Dreams. It's funny. I still might put The Natural as my number one baseball movie, because Field of Dreams transcends baseball movies,
interesting,
because it is beyond, because honestly, they never play. It's never about a game. It's Field of Dreams is as far from a sports movie as you can get and still be a sports movie.
Right. You can argue that absolutely 100%, because they're just having fun playing ball with each other, but there's no investment in who wins or loses in the ball game. It's more about uniting a father and son through this mystical path here and this stadium that he builds out in his cornfield. Yeah, exactly. That's actually a really excellent point, Steve. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating too to explore, like, 8 Men Out, which was 1988, based on the Black Sox scandal. Yeah. Such a good movie. So many up and coming young actors. John Cusack, D.B. Sweeney, all these people being a part of David Strathern there, who was beginning to make his name around that time. And so 8 Men Out is also an interesting film. So amidst this time of reverential approach to baseball with Bull Durham, with Field of Dreams, with The Natural, and with what's the other one? And with Major League, you have something like this that explores the scandal of baseball. And not too long after this, we have the Pete Rose betting scandal. So the fact that they were willing to explore this kind of stuff around this time, I thought was a fascinating approach to baseball as well. And of course, I'm leaving out some of these more TV movies about baseball or things of that nature, or episodes from TV shows that featured baseball, because there was a lot of baseball stuff in the 80s, both in TV and film, for sure, that people could enjoy and explore. But these films in the 80s were really the ones that kind of exploded the possibility of what a baseball movie could be. And as we go into the 90s here, we have The Babe, which is another attempt at the Babe Ruth story with John Goodman and oh god, what's the actress? Kelly from I forget, from Top Gun. My mind just goes sometimes now. Kelly McGillis, right? Rookie of the Year. We have there The Sandlot, which I know is a lot of people's favorite film in terms of baseball. Angels in the Outfield. Cobb, which is a film that I think is a unrecognized, incredible performance from Tommy Lee Jones as Ty Cobb. Little Big League, which a lot of people love. And then you get The Fan, Soul of the Game, and then two terrible Major League films, Major League 2 and Major League Back to the Minors. And then one kind of final stab from Costner at the end. Is how funny how he bookends both the 80s and the 90s with a baseball film here, with Field of Dreams in 89 and in 99 for Love of the Game. So it feels like we do get good baseball movies in the 90s, but they're starting to veer into the younger crowd, into the more childish approach to baseball movies. What are your thoughts on these movies from the 90s as you look back and see these here?
So first of all, there's several that I've never seen, including one of people's favorites. I have never seen The Sandlot.
Oh, wow. That could be
Yes.
a good watch along at some point.
I think that might be a great watch along. I know people love it. I've always heard great things. Obviously, I love baseball movies. I've never seen it. For Love of the Game, I think is a fascinatingly, for a movie about a perfect game, it is not a perfect movie. It is a movie that kind of goes off the rails many times, but where that movie works, I think it really works really, really well. I think there's really good thing. It's Sam Raimi, isn't it?
Yes, it is Sam Raimi who directs this film. Yeah.
It might be the least Sam Raimi film there is.
There's no Dutch angles. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Costner is really, it's it's sort of like, oh, Costner, it's post Waterworld Costner. It's Costner on the downturn trying to come back. And I think there's really good things in it. And of course, there's, A League of Their Own is a movie we did on the Cine-Files.
Oh my God. Sorry about that. Yes, go ahead.
Which is an absolutely, again, it's a movie where I wish there were more movies like this. It's really good. And because it's a movie we did on the Cine-Files and we did it with Kay Cannon, and it was a two-parter, and it was a fantastic, it's one of our great episodes. It's really funny, by the way. I don't know if you have this, but there is a special glow about certain movies, not because of the movie, but because of the great conversation we had on our show, and League of Their Own is definitely one of them.
100%. I think League of Their Own, I mean, you can arguably put League of Their Own in the ballpark with The Natural. And by that, I mean, it does harken back to that time in World War II time, that feeling that baseball had, right? And these women who are stepping forward to take the mantle from the men who are overseas and be a part of this league that's starting and fighting through the sexism, fighting through the things that were expected of women or how women were supposed to be seen back in those days, and really establishing themselves very powerfully in that movie with a reverence for the game. These games matter as you're watching the movie. There's emotional issues between the top two players there with Kitty and Dot. There's stuff going on with Madonna and Comedy Relief, and stuff with Rosie O'Donnell and Comedy Relief that's really interesting. But at the core of it, it's about the love of baseball. Even Tom Hanks's way out there character there, you see that he comes back eventually to understand why the game matters and why giving yourself to the game is so important, why respecting the game is so important. And throughout the film, that's really a strong undercurrent throughout, is this respect and love for the game of baseball, which is why I think it ends with them at that Hall of Fame for the women, a section for the women there who played in those leagues, because that's the reverence, that's the hallmark of respect for a time in baseball, is ending up in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I think that's a wonderful thing to see. And I agree with you on For Love of the Game. Everything with Kelly Preston is not good. Everything in the ballpark is great. And for me, everything with the jerk off at the bar making his comments is ridiculous. Everything at the ballpark with him and John C. Riley, with him and the guy they used to be teammates. All that stuff really works. The owner, I think it's Brian Cox who's the owner, and all of that works so well as you're navigating this for Kevin Costner. And it's almost like Costner himself is the baseball movie. By the end, right?
Yeah.
They're asking him for one more thing, and he's done. He's not going to do it anymore. And it almost, in a way, was meta about saying how this is the end of the death of the baseball movie. In essence, even though we do get Moneyball and a couple other films in the 2000s, 2010s that kind of live up to the baseball, what greatness the baseball movie can be, it's not really the same kind of approach to baseball movies as we get in the 80s and 90s. And in a meta way, I feel like Costner symbolizes that with what he goes through in that movie. Am I crazy to make that comparison?
I don't think you're crazy at all. I have a vague memory because that was when I did my dumb quality control and DVD jobs. I remember doing that movie, and I actually remember a conversation. I feel like in one of the behind the scenes or something, is Costner saying literally like, "This is the last time I can make a baseball movie. I am aging out of this, and this is my farewell to that." So what you're saying, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Okay. I hadn't thought about it. That's just as we're talking, our conversations always spark things with me. So let's move into the 2000s here. I'm going to bring in a TV movie, which I think is fantastic. And if people haven't seen this film, you need to. 61 with the asterisk there. That is a film that Billy Crystal directed about Roger Maris breaking Babe Ruth's single season home run record. It's ironically right around the time we're about to go in the steroids era where Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire falsely break the record. I've never give them credit and will never give them credit. But this film is fantastic. And it's a great Barry Pepper as Roger Maris and Thomas Jane as Mickey Mantle, and exploring what that whole journey was like. So if you guys haven't seen 61, it is an HBO movie, but I can't recommend it enough as one of the best baseball movies that have ever been made. Then you get Hardball with Keanu Reeves. You get The Rookie, which is a fantastic film, true story on Jack Morris, I think the pitcher's name is, that Dennis Quaid plays. Mr. 3000, a fun comedy with Bernie Mac. Fever Pitch, which is Jimmy Fallon when they were still trying to put him out as an actor with Drew Barrymore, and it's a remake of the original novel from Bruce Hornby when he's talking about his love for Arsenal. They made it his love for the Boston Red Sox in this remake. Bad News Bears gets remade with Billy Bob Thornton. And then you get The Sandlot 2, which I did not know there were 2 sequels to The Sandlot that came out into the 2000s. Neither one of them anywhere near the magical nature of the first Sandlot movie. So here's where we start to make a little bit of a downturn, Stephen. I'm going to put all 20 years together here because then we get Moneyball in 2011, Trouble with the Curve, which is a little bit of a underperforming film, 42, which is good. It's not great there with the late Chadwick Boseman's Jackie Robinson, $1 Million Arm. And then the last really big baseball movie, Everybody Wants Some from Richard Linklater, and that was back in 2016. So it's been 2016 and 8 years and counting since we've had a really big baseball movie come out. So what are your thoughts on why we get less baseball movies in the 2000s and they're not really the same quality or strength as we've seen before?
I think one of the things that unites that heyday in the 80s that we talked about is, even though, like I said, I think these are different genres, there's a romance to them. There's a love. There's an accepted love of baseball that goes beyond just, this is a sport that we like.
Yeah.
And I think that love it definitely exists in 61. And that's a movie I like you. I really like it.
Yeah.
I think, it's funny. I went and looked at like, what are the movies that Billy Crystal's directed? And, it's pretty good. City Slickers, Mr. Saturday Night, 61. And I think there was one other. Well, maybe that's it. Like,
okay.
Not a bad list as a director. Right. And I think that movie has that same love and history and romance of the other ones, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't think Moneyball is a baseball movie, but Moneyball is a different thing. It's because it is about sports, but it's actually the antithesis of a romantic movie about sports, because it is saying, because the whole idea that, and The Rookie being the more romantic one, is like, it's about the talent. It's about overcoming the adversity and winning the game. And that's how sports movies work. And that's how all of these movies have a connection of overcoming adversity, talent, and spirit, and all of that, which is very romantic. Moneyball, you couldn't be less romantic because
Yeah.
Moneyball is all about statistics. It's saying, let's treat baseball like a math problem. And I think it's a totally good movie. It's another one we did on the Cine-Files. I think it's a really interesting film, but it doesn't have all of this stuff. I think, and then I also think,
because you're not invested in the A's winning or not winning. You're invested in whether the formula is going to work or not. It's a great point, Steve. Yeah.
Well, and the formula is based on the formula. It's not based on the person overcoming adversity. It's based on it's actually proving the opposite point, which is that you're just math. Yeah. You're not a human spirit overcoming adversity. You are a something to plug into an equation.
Yeah. Your natural human instincts fit into this number thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Some of the other ones I think you also have to go into, we're not watching as much baseball, and when you go into then and there's things like, there's The Fan and there's some other ones where it's like interesting ideas set in a baseball world. Like, here's a way into doing this thing. I think there's definitely a change. I mean, and I agree with you. Is 42 a great movie? No, it's not a great movie. It's okay. It's good. And Chadwick Boseman is really good in it. I've never seen Mr. 3000. There's some other ones in there that I haven't seen, the one, which is the Linkletter one.
Oh yeah. Everybody wants them.
Yeah. Which I've heard is really good, but I haven't seen it. So, I think we go into sort of a different era in terms of what's your feeling about this era of baseball films?
It feels like we're stumbling around in the dark and occasionally putting the tail on the donkey, but most of the time missing it, right? Hardball is a nice, fine Keanu Reeves vehicle film with Diane Lane. It's fine. It's a white guy. It's that white savior situation, but in the inner city, teaching these poor black kids how to play baseball because he was a former baseball player, becomes, I think, a betting addict. And so this is part of his community service, is to coach these kids. And it's a really sweet film, but it's put in there with the replacements, right? It's those Keanu Reeves sports movies. You're like, okay, fine. The Rookie is fun, is good, I think, for what it is.
Yeah, I like The Rookie.
Yeah, The Rookie has that. And like you mentioned earlier, Steve, which is a whole way to look at that I'd never thought of. Like, The Rookie is, like you said, it's the baby boomers' kids. The Rookie is the baby boomers' kids going like, I can do it one more time if I get a chance. Even at this advanced age, I might still be able to do it, right? And so it kind of scratches that itch that I think a lot of people feel. Fever Pitch is kind of a throwaway, fun little rom-com. Not much goes on there. The Bad News Bears remake is fine, but it doesn't hold a candle to the original. And a lot of these other films don't really work for me, baseball-wise, that I didn't even bring up because they're just not good films. But Moneyball, I think is great to highlight that one, because obviously it's one that's been nominated and had Oscar love and buzz and whatever. Probably the best performance of Brad Pitt's career so far. But the film itself is mirroring what has happened with baseball, and that the advent of statistics and statistics removing the individuality and the humanity of the players, as you so well stressed here a couple of minutes ago. And that's really where it starts to become, well, where's the magic? Where can I find the magic if we're looking at a sport that is now leaning towards numbers more than humans and their abilities and you remove the magic when you've choreographed the moment to happen. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I think that's where people start to lose affection for the baseball movies. And so they try. Trouble with the Curve was a nice try. It's not that good of a movie. Everybody Wants Them is fine, but it's really not that interesting in my opinion. $1 Million Arm is an interesting film, but again, kind of on fumes of those feel-good baseball movies. And 42 doesn't quite get there. So for me, that's what we start to see as the stumbling. And I can't help but think that it's also the advent of free agency really being a big deal in the 2000s. So the idea of having one player stay on one team for multiple years, really, it started to change in the 90s, but it really changes in the 2000s and 2010s. So you don't really have these baseball moments that you used to have. Yes. Are there bottom of the ninth? Yes. And are there scandals like with the Houston Astros? Yes. Are there teams winning series that they shouldn't win? Yes. There's still magic in baseball, of course, but I don't think we feel it in the same way. And we're just a different type of people now, that hearkening back to that magic of baseball, we're much more reality looking at baseball, which is why I think what's exploded over the last 20 years, that's been amazing, 24 years has been amazing to see, is the baseball documentary. That has essentially replaced the great baseball movies of the 80s and 90s. There are so many incredible baseball documentaries, and I know baseball is from the 90s, the Ken Burns one, but the ones of the last 24 years on 30 for 30 on ESPN, on numerous other streaming sites, there are a plethora of baseball documentaries that will be so phenomenal for you all to watch and experience. The Yogi Berra one that came out last year was fantastic. It is on Max if any of you want to watch it. I think that's what's replaced the baseball movie is the documentary. And more often than not, they're going back in time to profile old baseball players, like, as I said, Yogi Berra, Hank Greenberg, right? The great Jewish baseball player, going back to Fernando Mania with Fernando Valenzuela. A lot of the baseball docs are going back in time because people still remember those times and want to kind of live back in those times. So I think that's the difference now, is that people want to go back to that and hearken to that, but the movies aren't reflecting that. So these baseball documentaries have kind of filled that need, in my opinion.
So I have a thought. It is not even half baked. I'm going to call this a quarter baked thought. and this is what it is, which is that we talked about the moment that baseball movies come to, which is that pitch and the home run, or are you going to strike it out or not?
Yeah.
And what occurred to me is that, and in relationship to Moneyball, is that what I've always heard is that hitting a baseball successfully is among the hardest thing in sports, if not the hardest thing in sports.
Yes.
That you're going to get up and you're going to fail. It's not just that if you do it successfully 1 out of 3 times, you're a 300 hitter and that's awesome. Right. It's that you're actually in that 1 out of 3 times. It could be 1 out of 9 times.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be balls, they're going to be strikes, you're going to foul a few off. It could go on a long time before you actually hit that ball in play. Right. And that is it's mathematically so improbable. It's almost like a miracle. It's almost like magic. You know what I mean? And so as long as we believe in magic, we can believe in the miracle. And again, you go back to The Natural. The Natural is a movie about magic. I mean, like, that bat is magical. It was struck by lightning. I mean, like, it's all King Arthur. And so even though we're in a movie that's about a sport, we're really in a movie about a knight in shining armor who's going to perform a miracle at the end of the movie, which he does.
Yeah. Who's been
Moneyball
and stabbed and haven't overcome that. Yeah.
Exactly. Moneyball is the antithesis of miracles. It is stripping all of that away. Mm-hmm. And so I don't like, in general, because like people go like, oh, we're too cynical to love a Superman movie anymore. I don't believe that. I actually think the 70s was a super cynical time. And that's exactly what we need in cynical times. But I do think that maybe this cynicism has infected sports movies a little bit in a way that we're no longer allowing ourselves to believe in miracles. And I don't personally believe in miracles. I personally believe in math, but like, I like to go see movies about miracles. And to just transition to what you're talking about in terms of documentaries, I think you, who know I'm not a sports guy, would be surprised at how many sports documentaries I watch.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I love 30 for 30. I don't think I've ever watched a 30 for 30 doc and gone, that sucked.
Yeah.
I think I probably enjoyed everyone. I used to love, I'm sure you love them too, those old NFL films that where you heard the music and you had the old slow motion, and like those things were fantastic. I watched like a Barry Sanders documentary that I saw that was
on Prime Video. Yes.
Yeah. I watch a ton. I was just looking as I was looking for baseball movies. I was like, oh, there's a Nolan Ryan documentary that I've heard is good. I haven't seen it. I'd like to watch that. The Greenberg one I'd like to watch. Like, there's a lot of, so I actually totally, because what a documentary can do is it can give you both. It can give you the build of filmmaking to make those moments incredibly dramatic, and actually shows you the great players in the real moments that we've experienced. So I think sports documentaries are fantastic. They're not the same, but they're great.
They're exploding so much over the last 20 some years. And like last year, there was also the Reggie documentary that's on Prime Video, the Nolan Ryan, which is great. The exploration of Reggie Jackson now, all these years later, and having multiple people talking about Reggie in 2023 for this documentary, which I think is a great way to kind of reevaluate what his experience was like and what he did back then. Facing Nolan is the one you're talking about. That's on Netflix. There's a great 7-part documentary that is an ESPN documentary that's connected to 30 for 30 on Derek Jeter called The Captain, where you're watching him from the beginning stages of his life with footage and documentary footage that they're using, and watching him progress as a young ball player through his high school years, college years, into the Yankees, and then and then winning all his World Series and transitioning out of the Yankees. That's a fascinating one that I thought people should absolutely watch. There's a great one on pitchers called Fastball that narrated by Kevin Costner. There's another one called Hardball that explores the girls of baseball, because women are starting to play baseball more and more. There's been a clamoring for women to play in leagues like we're seeing now with the WNBA. We're seeing now with female soccer leagues. There has been this discussion of women playing baseball again, like a league of their own, and coming back and bringing leagues together, which I think is a fantastic thing to explore as well. And also the steroids era. Screwball is a great documentary from Billy Corben there, who directed that. He did the Cocaine Cowboys one, I think is the one he did. But yeah, this is one exploring steroids and baseball, Tony Bosch and the Balco thing with A-Rod and Manny Ramirez. And so there's a lot of incredible documentaries, as you said, that are throughout, and they talk about the Negro Leagues and the desegregation. There's so many of those. There's one on Team Israel that came out in 2018 at the World Baseball Classic that I think is one that people should watch as well. So there are so many great. Doc and Daryl. There's a 4-parter on the New York Mets, who won the World Series in '86, which I think is fantastic. As I said, the Fernando Nation, is great. There's a horrible one called 4 Days in October, where they profile the Red Sox beating the Yankees in 2004, which never happened. And there's so much that there's there for you all to enjoy. So if you wanted to walk back into baseball, there are the documentaries is where it is nowadays, and I think has really replaced the theatrical baseball movie. And we'll see. Let me finish our discussion, and we'll get into Streamlabs Super Chats after the break. But maybe let's take a break, and I'll ask Steve one last question as we wrap up our conversation about baseball movies. Steve, let's take a quick break, brother, and we'll be right back right after this. All right, Steve. So before I went to break, I wanted to ask you one question here, and we've talked about how baseball movies have kind of fallen off the map a little bit, or are sporadic through the last 24 years. Do you see a time where the baseball movie comes back and has a renaissance, like we saw in the 80s and and in the 90s? Do you think there's a possibility down the road for the baseball movie, or have we kind of moved on and it is now the domain of documentaries, and maybe we're looking at basketball or football to take its place and have a bit of an explosion here of movies? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to give you my hopeful thought.
Okay.
And my hopeful thought is that, of course, we will. I think that I don't think, just like I don't think we're ever going to get the golden age of the Western that we had in the 50s and the John Ford era.
Sure.
But there will always be eras where there's a little mini run of Westerns that will come along. Like, because these are great topics for movies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And yes, the world is changing, but we'll have a little mini run of musicals. We'll have a little mini run of historical dramas, things like that. I think in this world where it's not that IP films are failing and are going to go away. We're stuck with them. They're going to be here for a long time, and hopefully we'll have more good ones than bad ones. But I think the last year of films, and particularly, as we did our Oscar, we went through all the reviews of the Oscar movies, there was a whole wide range of genres there that were really interesting. And so I actually think that there is room for baseball movies to come back. Are we ever going to get a run like that late 80s run with the Kevin Costner movies and all this? No, I don't think that's ever going to happen again. But I do think there's going to be a fantastic baseball movie and a couple of other good ones that come along in a short space of time. And then there'll be a little time, and then there'll be another one. That's what I think.
I think it'll take the real life baseball stories to somehow break through into the pop culture mainstream. And I don't mean that people don't know about baseball. Of course they do. But it'll take a team. I mean, I could see like a film on the 2004 Red Sox, right? The team that was the lovable losers,
Right.
finally overcoming the curse, finally vanquishing the Yankees when they were down 3-0 in that series and had gotten their butts kicked 19-7, I think, the game before. And they came back and beat the Yankees and went into the series and won the World Series for the first time in a century. The Chicago Cubs winning the World Series for the first time in a century. Like, There are great documentaries on that, but I think there's enough characters amongst those ball players on those teams. So I think that, or you can do a film on the Houston Astros and the cheating scandal, and even have a happy ending, how they overcame all the negative nonsense around them and valid negative nonsense around them to win the World Series yet again a couple of years ago after the cheating scandal. So there's still so much more to explore in baseball, but I think it needs these stories to burst through in the pop culture zeitgeist, and then that inspires screenwriters to write, directors to want to do them. And that's another part of this. How many directors are going to baseball games? Like John Sayles was a massive baseball fan. These directors of these films were huge baseball fans. Barry Levinson was a huge baseball fan. Do we have young people coming up through the film world who also went to ball games and felt the love of baseball? Because I think that's also essential, is that is got to be ingrained in you as a director. It doesn't mean a director who's never played baseball or loved baseball couldn't direct a good baseball, of course. But I think there's a special magic when you do love the game, those little extra oomphs, a little extra knowledgeable bits that appeal to fans who are fans of the game. And I wonder if there are any filmmakers like that who are experiencing that, because I think that also has to be part of the combination to bring back an occasional spurt of great baseball movies, as you just said earlier. So I agree with you. I think I'm hopeful that they could come back, but it'll probably never come back in the way that it was before, which is a shame. But we always have those movies, Steve, thank God, to go back and relive and enjoy, right?
Well, yeah, and I'm just going to give the opposite answer of the answer I gave before, because it's like, well, why were there so many Westerns? Well, when Hollywood started, it wasn't that far from the Old West, and there were actual old Western cowboys that were advisors on films.
Wyatt
and
Earp.
It was an easy, Wyatt Earp, and it was an easy way to do a genre, particularly in the silent era. And the filmmakers that came up in that era, like John Ford, came up making those things, and the filmmakers that came up on John Ford also came up on The Lone Ranger and all of the TV that was Western TV. You and I are the last generation that probably watched any of Gunsmoke and Bonanza or things like that in reruns. I don't think kids today are watching that stuff. And so there are fewer and fewer people inspired to make Westerns. Well, there are fewer and fewer, I don't know what the numbers of kids that play Little League are, but I know that they're down. You know what I mean? And so, and while as you say, attendance is up at the games, the viewership is down. Right. And so it's a numbers game. It's a Moneyball game. Is the number of people that are inspired, that have deep connection to baseball to make the great baseball movie, are a lot smaller than the number of people that have deep connection to Iron Man who want to make an Iron Man movie.
It's a great point. Vincent Zawada makes a great suggestion. Ben Affleck. Absolutely. Ben directing a baseball movie would be incredible. But I bet Ben has pitched baseball movies and the studios aren't biting. I bet they don't see any money in it. And so, but I would love to have Ben Affleck do a baseball movie, even if it's for Netflix or Max or a streaming service. It would be fascinating to see Ben Affleck, who loves baseball, and Matt Damon too, as producers on a baseball film to bring. Maybe they do the 2004 Red Sox film. I don't know. It could be really interesting because they're both Red Sox fans. All right, Steve, anything more we want to say on baseball movies? Do you want to talk about any more baseball memories, or shall we move on to our listeners, or our viewers rather, Streamlabs and Super Chats?
I would love some Streamlabs and Super Chats.
Let's move it on. Carlton Rudder, who is going to be watching us later in the UK when he wakes up, said, London calling, heading to bed here in the UK, so we'll watch tomorrow. Favorite baseball movies, Moneyball, Field of Dreams, and 42. Each of your shows is a home run. Oh, that's very kind.
Thank you. I think we've had a few triples and a couple of, but I think we've had very few errors. Look, I'm not going to say every show is a home run. I can't say that. But I don't think we've ever struck out. I don't think there's a single strikeout in the Cine-Files catalog.
I agree. That's probably a great way to put it. We always get on base one way or another.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah. Sometimes we walk. It's true. JB says, and by the way, fascinating to have a Brit be into baseball movies. And that's another thing that appeals about the great baseball movies. They transcend countries because they've done well overseas. The great ones have done well overseas. JMB says, are we kind of in a lull for sports movies overall? Great question. The thumbnails you guys put together tend to be older films, but am I being unfair here? You guys are the best. Well, we are the Cine-Files, and we like to have a 10-year window. So naturally, the film thumbnails are going to be older films. But I hear your point. Steve, are we in a lull for sports movies?
We're in a lull of all genres. but Hollywood is in a lull. I mean, that's, like,
point.
no, this is absolutely true. When we did our episode on 80s comedies,
Yeah.
we couldn't stop listing them. It was comedy after comedy.
You're
There
right.
was like 20 comedies a year in the 80s. So there were literally, I'm sure we went over 100 comedies that we list. How many comedies have there been this year? There have been
Yeah. Not that
4,
many. Yeah.
3, like, that's what I mean. We're in a lull of all genres. If you're not, Hollywood, for the most part, is interested in big IP. And if you're not big IP, they are not interested in you. So yes, we are in a lull of sports movies. We're in a lull of Westerns. We're in a lull of musicals. We're in a lull of comedies. We're in a lull of all the kinds of films that there used to be romances, romantic comedies. We don't, there used to be 10 romantic comedies. Now they're not. Like, so yes, we are definitely in a lull of sports movies.
Yeah. I agree. There is a lull of sports movies overall, but not lull in sports documentaries. Again, there are just so many.
Great point.
And I think that's what's really replaced, as I said earlier. So thank you, JMB, for your super chat. We appreciate it. Beto Power says, I have an explanation for attendance going up in MLB. It is by far the cheapest sport out of the NBA, NFL, MLB. I can go watch the Cubs for $20 easily. Steve, I think that's an excellent point, because I remember when I lived in LA, I could go see a Dodgers game for $6 in the upper tier, have great seats, see everything. And as the game wore on at night, if it dragged on a little bit longer, you could move down, because LA people love to leave before the game is over. You could legally move down section by section, that by the end, you could sometimes be behind the dugout, depending on how long the game went. So yeah, I agree with that. That's an excellent point. It's cheaper to go to the ball game than any place else.
For baseball. Can I tell you something that pisses me off?
Please.
There are all sorts of ways in which cities try to bring business to their community by offering tax credits and deals and all sorts of stuff. We just talked about in our spoiler alert, but Captain America the Winter Soldier was shot in Cleveland, partially because they offered a really big tax credit. And there's all sorts of debates about whether or not this actually helps the communities. One of the biggest ones by far is, we will build you the big stadium for billions of dollars. We will help you get it built so you keep your team in our city. I want teams to stay in cities. But when, and this just happened down in Los Angeles with the football stadium, is like, when you build that and entire focus is for giant corporations to have luxury boxes and people to spend $50,000 to lock down their seat, and you're not saying, we need to make sure that there are those $20 tickets for our community to go see the fucking games, that pisses me off.
You talk about SoFi. I think that's what you're referencing. Yeah,
SoFi, yes, but it's all over the country. I mean, this happens over and over and over again. Is that it's big corporations that want to get these stadiums built, and they want massive government handouts, and they're not supporting the communities coming to see these games.
Yeah, and it's a shame, because we're on the precipice of the Oakland A's moving to Las Vegas. That is absolutely in the mix, or in motion now. And so we will see if that ends up happening. But it seems very clear from what I'm reading and have been reading, that Oakland is insulted by the situation, and they're not going to sit there and be held hostage by the owner. And sadly, a great baseball town that has won World Series in the 1970s, they have a history of winning series, is heading to Las Vegas. And I don't know. That doesn't feel right to me. A great salt of the earth team like the Oakland A's, who've always had to work under a certain budget, are now going to a flashy city like Las Vegas. I just don't see the logic in that, and how that helps baseball in any way, shape, or form.
Well, the look of super. I mean, people who own sports teams are the richest of the rich.
Oh yeah,
and super rich people with industries that make billions of dollars, begging a city to Oakland, or shaming a city to Oakland into ponying up a ton of money, or we're taking the team hostage. I don't like it. You know.
Yeah, agreed. Let's hit these two Streamlabs. Justin Toner, thank you, Justin. He says, hi, John and Steve. Been looking forward to this show. Some of my favorite baseball films are The Sandlot, A League of Their Own, 8 Men Out, Major League, Bull Durham, and Tom Selleck's Mr. Baseball. Yes. Rookie of the Year, and of course, Field of Dreams. Yeah, Justin, absolutely. Yeah, any of those we didn't talk about enough, Steve? Like,
it's funny. I had Mr. Baseball on my that's like peak Tom Selleck.
Yes,
it's late 80s, I think, and it's like after Magnum PI, and then we had 3 Men and a Baby and all those things. And
Quigley Down Under. Yeah.
Quigley Down Under. I watched all of them. I love Tom Selleck. And my memory, I have not seen Mr. Baseball in 30 years, but my memory is it's a fun movie.
It is a fun movie. And it's one of those movies that dealt with the burgeoning Japanese interest in baseball and the fact that they've played that for many decades in their country. It was an exposure for American people to see how Japanese people viewed the game and why they love the game the way they do. So, yeah. And now one of the biggest stars is Ohtani there for the Dodgers, who's a massive Japanese player. And a lot of people consider him, are already seeing him as possibly the greatest player ever, which is insane this early in his career. And thank you, Justin. Appreciate the Streamlabs. And yes, all of those I think we talked about. Rookie of the Year is a fun film. I haven't seen it in a long time. That was one that was a little bit past my age range, but I know 90s kids do love that film, and Sandlot. Those are those, and Angels in the Outfield. I know the 90s kids love those three movies for sure. And then Wayne Edwards says, good afternoon. It is The Natural at the top, and then every other baseball movie afterwards. A beautiful film. The last 20 minutes is magic. The breaking of Wonder Boy, Roy's injury, and the epic home run with the music and the imagery makes it so great. Steve?
What can I add? I agree 100% with everything that Wayne has said. And again, I'm going, at some point we're going to redo The Natural. Because I love that movie.
Maybe we do it this year, like by the World Series. That could be a lot of fun to redo The Natural around the time of the World Series. And we don't always have to put it up for a vote. Sometimes me and you just want to do it.
No, absolutely. Well, we redid It's a Wonderful Life. That wasn't because of a vote. That was because it's like, no, we need to do this movie.
Yeah. The Natural may be one we revisit around World Series time. That could be a lot of fun to kind of walk back into that world, because I've been itching to watch that movie again and kind of dive in deep on it for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, my throat's getting dry. So I think this is a good time to wrap it up. Steve, anything more we want to talk about in terms of baseball? Any final words you want to say as we wrap up here?
I mean, I kind of want to go. I might want to go to a batting cage after this conversation. I'm like kind of feeling like I missed some baseball. I mean, it's so funny to think this thing that I did as a kid, from my first glove when I got it at 3 or 4 years old, all the way through college. There was always a softball game. There was always a little league game. There was always a game. And I even briefly was on a softball league with our friend Josh Moon, although I wasn't very good. But I have not picked up a bat or played any baseball in probably 15 or 20 years. And I'm like, oh, this conversation is not just making me miss baseball movies. It's kind of making me miss playing baseball.
Yeah, I appreciate that for sure. It's been a while since I've been in a batting cage and got those splinters on, or those blisters on my hands. But it might not be a bad idea to hit around the batting cage every once in a while again. So I remember the one in Burbank, used to go to that one all the time.
Oh yeah,
when I lived back in LA, and that was always a nice way to unwind from a day of DVD testing, is smacking the ball around and get your rage and frustration out for an hour swinging the bat. So we will see for sure. But yeah, I mean, baseball movies endure. They stand the test of time, and I think they are passed down like the experience of going to the ballpark is passed down. And I think that still happens with certain fathers and certain sons who love the game of baseball, who love these movies, who revere these movies. And so in a way, those movies have become the trip to the ballpark. And hopefully that instills the love of future filmmakers, and shows the love of baseball into some future filmmakers who will one day direct another great baseball movie that we can add to the lexicon of fantastic baseball movies. But the power of them is always about the team and the individual at the same time. And I think the way we're built in this country, and maybe in a lot of areas of the world, is revering the team, but also excited about the individual battles that occur with a team game like baseball, not to mention the majesty of the lights and the ballpark and the smells and the food and the camaraderie. Sometimes it's just fun to go to a ballpark and sit there and just talk with your friend the whole time while you're watching the game. You're reconnecting. And so I think those films have always brought that back for us. And hopefully this conversation today was a way of you guys hanging out with us at the ballpark as we're watching the game and just having some fun talking about our favorite baseball movies and baseball moments. So thank you very much for joining us live. As we wrap up, Steve, what's the last thing we want to tell them in terms of following you and where they can follow everything we got going on in the show?
Well, you can follow me at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And of course, you can follow the Cine-Files at Cine_Files on Twitter, the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. We've already talked about patreon.com/the Cine-Files, where you can get ad-free versions of our show, watch-alongs, our Cine-Files shorts, which we just did a short on honesty and accuracy in films. then one on documentaries. We have an upcoming one, which was a fantastic conversation that we had about film criticism. That's, I think, coming up this week. And of course, our advisory board is meeting Tuesday at 4 p.m. And it's still time for you to join Patreon and join us for the advisory board meeting. And if you want to buy or stream, maybe I'll make a web page and put up some baseball movies at Cine-Files.net. So you can check out some of these films, and, because maybe we've inspired you to watch some of them, and all of that's at Cine-Files.net.
There you go. And you can follow me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The Outlaw Nation on Twitch. Please subscribe to the channel down below. Leave your comments about baseball movies. Hit a like on this video, but subscribe to the channel. And if you want to send us some special thanks, you can click that button and send that as well as a thank you for doing this show. We hope we entertained you. We appreciate you all madly. Thanks so much for listening to us or watching us and being a fan of the Cine-Files, whether you're a patron or not. We love you madly and we respect you and thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and we'll talk to you next time with another brand new episode here of the Cine-Files Live. For Steve Morris, I am John Rocha. Peace. Take care.